Elbagon is not a place you associate with violence. It is cold, quiet, and built on work. It is where Pius Machogu and Jerusha Kwamboka lived, elderly, faithful, and known for opening their home to others. After all, they were employers, they were churchgoers, they were people who believed that offering work was also offering dignity. Then in one weekend, they disappeared. Their phones went unanswered, their animals wandered unattended, and the people they trusted most became the center of a murder investigation. Tonight on Murder Tapes, we examine how a domestic dispute inside a farm compound turned deadly, and how trust in a place where lives overlap became a fatal vulnerability. This is not a story about strangers breaking into the homes of Kwamboka and Machogu. It is a story about who was already inside. I'm Brian Obuya, and this is not just any other murder story on a TV near you. This is Murder Tapes, where the truth is buried in the evidence. The well-put murders, and so it begins. Machogu and Kwamboka were married in 1981. And for 44 years, they walked through life side by side, quietly, steadily, and building something that was never meant to make newspaper and TV headlines. Pius Machogu, born in 1953, grew up in classrooms where discipline and ambition had shaped his early years. From Matibo Primary School to Amagaso Secondary School, his path carried him forward to college and eventually to the Insurance College in Karen. There, the man trained as a certified public accountant, a profession rooted in order, balance, and trust. And for many years, he worked as the chief accountant at Posta Sacco, a man behind the scenes, keeping systems running until the year 2002, when the government downsizing marked the end of formal employment and the beginning of a quieter chapter in business. Machogu had opted for early retirement after the state announced the doing away with over 25,000 employees across its parastatals. Jerusha Kwamboka, on the other hand, just 2 years younger, devoted her life to teaching. From Esani Primary School to Motagara Secondary and later to Kericho Teachers Training College, she followed a calling that demanded patience and firmness. Those who knew her remember a strict disciplinarian, a teacher who believed structure was an act of care. She served under government employment for years, shaping generations of students before retiring from the classroom. Retirement led the duo to the land in Elbagon. They bought a farm in Tarragonic village in Elbagon. It was cold and fertile ground where mornings arrive wrapped in mist and evenings settle glaringly early. The land was quiet, broken only by wind moving through crops and the distant sounds of neighbors working their own fields. And here, they planted, kept animals, and opened their home. It was a place chosen for rest, for faith, for watching grandchildren grow. They had raised 4 children and were proud grandparents to 7.
This is a new settlement scheme. Inaitwa Ngongongeri settlement scheme. Ili watu walikuwa allocated land hapa 1997 na former retired president Daniel Arap Moi.
In this homestead, life followed a gentle routine. Remember, Kwamboka was a teacher. So it was about church, farm work, shared meals, familiar faces passing through the gate. Trust was part of that routine, and so was generosity. It was here in the stillness of a place they believed was safe that their lives were violently taken. No warning. There was no farewell. It was just a sudden, irreversible silence that settled over the land they had worked, loved, and called home. And even long after their deaths, that silence would linger in the cold air, in the empty rooms, and in a village struggling to understand how a life built over decades could end in a single moment of brutality. But you might want to know why these 2 accomplished professionals from Gusiland settled in Nakuru County. So here we go. Now, Molo sits quietly between busy roads, between forests and farms. It's a highland town stretched thin by cold air and long distances. And just beyond it, Elbagon opens into wide working land, fields of maize and potatoes rolling into the horizon, broken only by homesteads and makeshift farmhouses. This is a place built by soil and sweat. Indigenous families live side by side with people from every corner of the country, drawn here by farming, by seasonal work, by the promise that land will always need hands. And of course it did.
Watoto hapa wanaongea Kiswahili. Sasa ni ngumu ujue mtoto ni kabila gani. Hapana, ujue akikuja Mjaruo anafundishwa Kikuyu, anajua Kikuyu. Akikuja Mkale anafundishwa Kikuyu, anajua Kikuyu. Na mimi nafundisha wangu Kikale. Tunajuana sisi wao. Na hapa tunaona kila kabila.
By day it feels metropolitan in its own way. Busy markets, border borders, chatter in many languages. By night, this town retreats into darkness, the cold settling heavily, the silence broken only by the wind moving through crops. The roads here are unforgiving. They are narrow, potholed, and dust-choked in dry weather. There are muddy traps when it rains. An old railway line cuts through the land like a forgotten scar, snaking through fields and estates. And just next to the Machogus, this railway line passes. They would hear the train once in a while and reignite their lives with that sound. And once in a while, when that train passes, slow and lonely, it reminds residents of a past when Molo was more connected than it feels today. Now, much of life here moves on foot or by chance.
Hapa watu wengi ni wakulima. Na unakuta hata kama sisi ni wakulima, tunafinyika kwa sababu soko ni mbaya. Unakuta unalima mahindi, unalima kwa bei kali, lakini kununua unalima bei ya chini. Kwa hivyo watu wengi wanapotea kulima viazi, kulima cabbage, maharagwe kama hiyo yenye unaona, kitu kama hiyo. Hiyo ndio cash crop ya hapa. Hiyo ndio inatupa riziki.
It was in this landscape that two elderly employers, Jerusha and Machogu, known in the community as humble, hardworking, and deeply rooted in their faith, were brutally killed. According to the area chief, the couple were committed Seventh-day Adventists, consistent churchgoers whose lives revolved around honest work and quiet service. They were outgoing, they were approachable, and they were the kind of people who greeted neighbors by name and believed in giving others a chance. And that trust would one day prove to have been one of their life mistakes.
Alisaidia mandugu zake, majirani, hata distant relatives. Alisaidia kabisa. Akiwa Nairobi, alikuwa accountant posta. Nairobi Telecom. Yeah. Alisaidia sana. Alikuwa mtu wa kumsaidia. Alikuwa na mtu wa roho safi kabisa. Yeah. Imagine hata siku hiyo alilipa hata huyu mgora, akalipa yule mate. Siku hiyo alihesabu pesa yake na akawalipa mshahara. Yeah. Alikuwa very social person. Hata mimi nikikutana ananiita chief, area iko namna gani, nikitoka town. You know, he was living adjacent to town, Elbagon. So angesimama anisalamie kama chief wake. Yeah. He was a very social person.
Alikuwa ni mzee wa kanisa sana. Na anapenda watu, hata ukiona vile watu wamekuja kutoka area, anapenda watu. Hii kanisa iko hapa next. Hao ndio walianzisha kujenga from scratch na wakamaliza. Even before amie huko. So impact watu walikuwa najua huyu ni mzee wa kanisa.
Their killer, a farmhand they had taken in, turned on them following a dispute involving the house help. A disagreement that escalated into violence that no one saw coming. The chief, who is a former prison warden, speaks with the wary clarity of a man who has seen crime from both sides of the bars. He tells us that Molo has over time become a refuge of sorts, a place where fugitives blend into the farming economy, working as laborers with little or no documentation. Their pasts unasked and unverified. And in a region where work is plentiful and records are few, then anonymity is easy. Very, very easy. With the colonial mind of being sure about what you say, the chief showed up for this interview with his diary, reading notes from the date the tragedy struck.
Walikuwa wameuliwa na kutumbukizwa ndani ya maji, shimo la maji. So nilienda nikapata watu wa TCI walikuwa wamechukua Mr. Pius Machogu. Walianzia yeye, walikuwa wameuliwa na mfanyikazi.
It is difficult, almost unbearable to imagine how these events unfolded. How someone could move between violence and normalcy without pause. We have seen it before, you know. Suspects who insert themselves into searches for people they already know are dead. A performance of concern carefully maintained. In this case, Sisa Juma Wanyama, the farmhand, did exactly that. After the killings, he accompanied family members to the police station, standing beside them as they reported Machogu and Kwamboka as missing. He was fully aware at that time that their bodies were already hidden, not by anyone else, himself.
It's so unfortunate that good people wanakuwa slaughtered kama kuku. So si tulikuwa Nairobi, tukareceive simu from the neighbors, na wakatueleza kuna ng'ombe zinaonekana pale kwa shamba juu. So juu ndugu yangu ndio amefanya farming huku, ndio anaelewana, na akapigia watu wa kazi waende waangalie ng'ombe zenye zinakula. So wakaongea na huyo jamaa mwenye ameua, na alikuwa relax tu, hata namuexplainia kila kitu iko sawa. Ng'ombe zilikuwa za neighbor, na hiyo time ana explain hivyo hadi anacheka na ashaua watu wameweka ndani ya kisima.
Ng'ombe ndio ilifanya majirani wajue iko kitu abnormal kwa hiyo familia ya Mr. Machogu, because ng'ombe walipiga nduru kwenda huko kuuliza mama ayuko, baba ayuko, na walikweko, hata walikuwa iko kanisa hapo inaitwa Agano, walikuwa kanisa Jumamosi na the following day hawaonekani, na gate ilikuwa imefungwa. Ng'ombe walitokezea mlango ya nyuma ya gate ilikuwa close, ilibidi majirani waruke juu ya fence.
Tulipata habari kutoka kwa mtu anaitwa Zakari Nyamwea. Zakari Nyamwea ni niece ya marehemu wawili, Jerusa Machogu na Pius Machogu. Anatuambia tarehe 14 alijaribu kupigia mama yake Jerusa Machogu, of which hakushika simu. Akapiga, akarudia kupiga, simu haikushikwa. So akatoka Molo akaenda kwa boma yao huko mahali inaitwa Michinda. So kufika huko hakuwapata. So vile aliuliza mfanyikazi mwenye inaitwa Sisa Juma Wanyama, na Sisa Juma akamwambia walitoka na ajui walienda wapi. So yeye akachukua Sisa Juma wakuje wa report kwa station. So wale report huko Elbagon, OCS akawasikisa, akachukua Sisa Juma akainterrogate.
It was a calculated act of deception, one that would later unravel, but not before deepening the cruelty of what had already been done.
Akafika ugali, alipatikana tu anakaa ana shida. Wanasema wameenda safari, lakini kuonekana, imagine hakuna mlango haichafunguliwa, wako na permanent gate haichafunguliwa. Yes.
Na amefika ugali.
Anaendelea tu.
Ama alikuwa anaendelea kupiga?
Alikuwa anaendelea kupiga. So kuonekana huyo ni mtu mwingine mbaya, atatenda hiyo peke yake.
In Molo and Elbagon, life goes on amid beauty and hardship, faith and fear, and sometimes behind the promise of honest labor, then violence quietly takes root. The day the bodies were retrieved, Elbagon stood still. Word had traveled faster in the village. By mid-morning, villagers lined the fence that enclosed the Machogu compound. Men, women, and children, drawn not by curiosity but by disbelief. Some stood frozen, hands pressed tightly over their mouths. Others stared without blinking, as if refusing to accept what their eyes were about to confirm. Inside the compound, grief was louder. Anger spilled out in raw and unfiltered waves. Wails cut through the cold air. Relatives moved restlessly, pacing and shouting and demanding answers no one could give. At least not at that moment. Police officers formed a loose perimeter, leading the retrieval process with procedural discipline. Yet even they, I could see, appeared unsettled. Their faces betrayed it. This was not a crime they were accustomed to. Not here. Not against people this old. And not in this way, in this manner.
Kufikia saa hii inaonekana kwamba nguo za msichana ziko kwa nyumba na at least kuna vitu zake ziko. Sasa haijajulikana vizuri mahali alipo, kama alienda na akaacha hizo vitu ama ako wapi.
Ile ambayo tumebakisha sasa ni kujua aliko ule house girl ambaye alikuwa akifanya kazi kwa hii boma, ambaye hatujampata.
Yule msichana ambaye ni msichana wa kazi hapa nyumbani, huenda ikawa labda ako kwa kisima ama labda hatujui mahali yako. Kwa sasa tuko katika giza nene ambalo hatujui la kufanya.
At one corner of the compound, this woman, a relative of the couple, broke down completely. Her body lunged forward, rage overtaking grief. Several people restrained her as she struggled violently, trying to push past them, trying to reach someone, anyone that she could blame. She screamed until her voice appeared to fail her, collapsing into the arms holding her back.
So, how does a quarrel over an illicit affair between two workers cause the death of their employers? You're watching Murder Tapes. We take a short break.
At the center of it all was the well. Water was slowly being drained bucket by bucket, hour after hour. Each minute stretched unbearably long. Silence would fall, then be shattered by fresh cries from the crowd. The well, once ordinary, now felt like a wound carved into the earth. And after hours of waiting, the first body emerged. It was Mr. Pius Machogu. Police officers lifted Machogu carefully, reverently laying his body onto a ladder. A pink blanket was drawn over him, thin, inadequate against the enormity of the moment. As he was carried toward a police Land Cruiser, the crowd erupted. Anger surged. Wailing became uncontrollable. Some were shouting, others were falling to their knees. The grief was no longer private. It belonged to the entire village down in Tarragonic. Inside the house, family members walked through familiar rooms now stripped of life. They stood behind the metal grills, silent, staring, absorbing the reality that this home, once open and warm, had become a crime scene. They may not have been in tears at that time, but they had no words. They were just in shock. Above it all hung a sorrowful stillness. The cold air carried grief from one homestead to the next, and long after the police vehicle drove away towards the mortuary, that sorrow remained, hovering over Tarragonic. Heavy, unanswered and impossible questions emerged. They were also impossible to ignore. And as the hours passed and investigators began piecing together what had been happening within the compound, a troubling picture started to emerge. It was alleged that the farmhand had fostered relationship on the house help. A dynamic marked not by consent but by intimidation and control.
Inasemekana kwamba mfanyikazi na huyu msichana walikuwa na nia ya kuoana. Kwa hivyo ni kama walikuwa wamelala pamoja, lakini walipoamka asubuhi hawakuwa huyu wako wapi.
Huyo kijana alikuwa na mama alikuwa ameandika msichana wa kazi before, ndio sasa kijana akakuja leta. Na kulingana na vile mama alisema walikuwa kwa relationship, na ni kama huyo kijana alipatia msichana mimba. Alafu msichana alikuwa ni kama anataka kutoa hiyo mimba, and the guy did not want hiyo pregnancy itolewe. So akaanza kuwa threaten na panga akisema akitoa hiyo mimba tamuua. So all of a sudden mama wakiongea na sister yetu, akaambia sister yetu msichana amepotea mysteriously. The house help amepotea tu mysteriously. That was on Saturday. Na huyo kijana aliamka asubuhi akakamua. Baada ya kukamua ndiye akakuja kuletea wazazi ripoti that msichana haonekani.
It was said that the house help was pregnant, and faced with fear, uncertainty and pressure, she was contemplating terminating the pregnancy. That possibility became a breaking point.
Alikuwa ansie huyu msichana. Alikuwa amepanga ansie huyu maid. Aliambia, alimweleza usipokubali nikuoe nitakuwa. Yes. Sasa huyu akajaribu namna, nasikia alieba tu alipoenda kukamua ng'ombe. Huyu alipata nafasi ya kutoroka. Hapo ni karibu na town. Alikata shortcut, akapanda gari akaenda mpaka Nairobi. Aliwacha kila kitu. Alirudi baadaye, alienda Nairobi mahali huyu mzee alikuwa amemtoa. Akarudi baadaye, akaeleza kabisa hakuhusika na chochote. Hata alieleza data ya msichana ya hawa akina Machogu. Huyu mtu sio mzuri. Aliwaambia. Because hata yeye alikuwa ametishiwa.
Threats that escalated an already volatile situation and exposed the dangerous power imbalance that had been festering behind closed doors. What had appeared from the outside to be an ordinary working arrangement was now revealing itself as something far more disturbing.
So mzee alitoka Nairobi, akakuja siku hiyo. I think it was on Friday. Akakuja ako na kampuni, nasikia ako na kampuni ya chai ya chumvi. Anatengeneza chumvi. Akahesabu pesa yake mbele ya hawa. Akawalipa.
Sasa si vile msichana alienda wakaenda kanisa, hata akapewa sadaka akaenda katoka kanisani, but later on vile walirudi huko ni kama alipiga wazazi ambush. Akaanza na mzee akampiga shoka ya kichwa. In the process ya kumalizia mzee, mama akakuja akaona, unajua uwezi ona tu mtu wako akipigwa. So ile njia ya kuja kustruggle pia akapiga mama.
So yule alianziwa kuuliwa ni Mr. Machogu. Aliua, akabeba, akatumbukiza kwa shimo. Shimo ni karibu 80 meters. So alafu baadaye aliua, hata nasikia hakuwa mama. Alishika yeye, akapeleka kwa nyumba, akajaribu kuchukua ATM cards. Akaambia leta pin. Akachukua pin numbers yote. So pesa, nasikia aliitisha pesa. Na I understand TCI officers walirikaba hiyo vitu vyote na alijaribu kutoa pesa wa one of the ATM. Ingine akujua mama aliandikia ATM numbers. Lakini alijaribu kutoa moja, which was I think it was recovered by TCI officers.
So it's so unfortunate. Our parents are no more. We just need justice.
And I quite can't really understand. What did this covert illicit affair have to do with Machogu and his wife? And even then, How does someone cross that line? How does a disagreement turn into a decision to kill? Not once, but twice. Against people who offered work. Against people who offered shelter. Against people who offered trust. And I kept wondering and I kept asking myself, was it anger that spiraled out of control, or something deeper, something unseen? Was it desperation or entitlement, or was it fear, or a mind already fractured long before it arrived at that gate of the Machogus? Those answers now sit inside a suspect's head and perhaps nowhere else. What remains certain is this: Pius Machogu and Jerusha Kwamboka lived quietly, gave generously, and believed they were safe in their own home. Their deaths force a hard reckoning about motive, mental state, and about how easily violence can hide behind familiarity. In the aftermath of the killings, the area chief says this case has forced a hard reassessment of trust within the community. Crimes committed by visitors disguised as workers, he notes, have become an emerging concern, one that can no longer be ignored, and as a result, he now demands full personal details of all employees working within his jurisdiction.
Hapa imekuwa mafichoni kwa walivu karibu wengi sana. Sisi kama chiefs tuko na shida sana, lakini tumejaribu sana kama chiefs. Tumekuwa tukimonitor wafanyikazi sana. They are very dangerous. Yeye sio mtu wa kwanza kufanya mambo kama hayo. Na tuko na bomat. Tumejaribu, nimechora, nimeandika S number, name, ID number ya yule ameachiriwa, na namba ya chief mahali alitoka. Hiyo imenisaidia sana. Tunapatia watu wa nyumba 10 hiyo maforms. Ikichaa karibu 10, tunaenda tunawaita, tunaochi, tunapigia yule chief. Recently nimepata moja alikuwa ame commit murder at Kisii. Tuliongea na chief, alikuwa ameua mtoto yake. So TCI sijui familia waliongea na TCI walikuwa wakuja, lakini nimepupusa. Na sio huyo peke yake. Mtu akisikia nimeitisha hiyo particulars huwa wanatoroka.
It is a shift born not out of suspicion alone, but necessity. An attempt to close gaps that allowed anonymity to thrive, and to ensure that those who come to work in Molo and Elbagon are no longer invisible to the system meant to protect both employers and workers alike. In Elbagon, meanwhile, the land still bears the footprints of the Machogus, but the questions the couple's murders leave behind may never fully be answered.
Pius Machogu and Jerusha Kwamboka did not die because they were careless. They died because they trusted, just like many of their neighbors. In Elbagon, you see, labor is abundant, records are thin, and strangers quickly become part of the household. Most times, nothing happens. Sometimes, something irreversible does happen. For now, the law will take its course, but the questions remain about accountability, about protection, and about how easily violence can hide behind everyday work. Life must move on, and that is why the rain keeps falling in Elbagon. The railway still passes next to the couple's home, almost unnoticed. But their house, a home once opened in good faith, is now standing as a reminder of what was lost. This has been Murder Tapes. Thanks for watching. Good evening.